Kenyans must now withdraw their authority to be taxed. Kenyans must not pay for waste and corruption. This is a call to action by the Partnership for Change. On June 12th this year, the Minister of Finance, Amos Kimunya, presented the Government of Kenya's budgetary proposals on taxation to Parliament when he published the Estimates of Expenditure, the National Budget, for the year ending 30th June 2009. In the documents he tabled in Parliament on that day, Mr. Kimunya stated how much money Kenyans are expected as taxpayers to pay to the government for the services rendered to them, how and on what items and services the government intends to tax Kenyans, and crucially, on what budget items the government intends to spend Kenyan taxpayers' money collected during the year. The national budget he presented was broken down into two categories: recurrent expenditure and development expenditure. The total national budget, for which the minister asked for parliamentary approval, was 759,814,501,933 shillings.
Economic recovery strategy that has just ended. As honorable members are aware, we made tremendous progress on the current expenditure, Mr. Speaker. Honorable members will note from their copies of the printed estimates that were tabled yesterday that the gross recurrent expenditure for 2008 to 2009 are estimated at 563.6 billion. Now this includes 39.7 billion to be financed through appropriations in aid and 174.6 billion to be financed directly from the consolidated fund services, thereby leaving a net of 388.9 billion for discretionary expenditure. The consolidated fund services comprise 48.7 billion for domestic interest, 7.2 billion for foreign interest, 28.2 billion for pensions, gratuities, and other CFS appropriations. And in addition, I expect to finance internal and external redemptions amounting to 67.9 billion and 22.7 billion respectively. On development, Mr. Speaker, the gross development expenditure for 2008-09 is estimated at 196.2 billion. Out of this amount, 52.6 billion will be financed through appropriations in aid, comprising of direct project financing of 30.9 billion in loans and 4.7 billion in total appropriations in aid. Consequently, I expect to finance net development expenditures amounting to 143.6 billion from the Exchequer, and this comprises of 16.7 billion in grants, 16.5 billion in loans, and 110.3 billion from the government of Kenya.
The minister asked Parliament to approve his proposal to spend a total of about 563.5 billion shillings on recurrent expenditure and a balance of 196.225 billion shillings on development expenditure.
The next external financing, amounting to 25.2 billion or 1.1% of GDP, is expected to cover part of this budget deficit, leaving 101.8.
This proposal, otherwise known as the Estimates of Expenditure by the Government of Kenya for the year 2008-2009, consists of 55 votes. A vote represents a ministry or an agency of the Government of Kenya and direct charges on the consolidated fund, such as public debt and pensions. Votes ideally should be related to separate government functions. Unfortunately, in Kenya, functions have been split over time to create ministries for political reward, and this has had the effect of bloating the government of Kenya. The more ministries that have been created, the more votes that Parliament has to consider, and the more money that is spent by government. The 2008 budget was the first brought to Parliament by the Grand Coalition government, which was created after the signing of the National Accord of 28 February 2008. The National Accord contemplated a budget that would be designed to target some of the long-term issues which caused conflict in Kenya, including mass youth unemployment, rural and urban poverty, poor infrastructure, and widespread insecurity in Kenya. However, the proposal presented to Parliament by the Minister for Finance in June did not address these issues and looks very much like all budgets that have been presented before. This budget is heavily tilted in favor of spending more and more on the government than is spent on the public. In fact, the current budget says that out of every 100 shillings of tax money that the government of Kenya will collect in this year, 85 shillings will be spent on the recurrent expenditure of government and only 15 shillings will be spent on development expenditure. Recurrent expenditure refers to the day-to-day running costs of government. Development costs, on the other hand, are those related to tangible benefits for the public, including infrastructure, health, education, and public goods such as security. As proposed by the Minister for Finance on June the 12th, the following are the administrative, running, and operating costs of the Government of Kenya for the year ending the 30th of June 2009. 117.6 billion shillings in current grants to government agencies and other levels of government. This includes budget support to parastatals and state corporations who do not contribute much to the national budget. 94.2 billion shillings in the basic salaries for the permanent employees of the Government of Kenya. It should be noted that although the government employs 480,765 people according to its own records, 80% of the government staff are teachers, nurses, policemen, prison warders, the administration police and others who earn less than 15,000 shillings gross and still pay taxes on their income. 59.5 billion shillings in personal allowances paid as part of salary. 14 billion shillings in the routine maintenance of assets and equipment of the government. 11.2 billion shillings on an annual basis in subsidies to non-financial public enterprises. This is money for administrative costs for free secondary education, for example. 10.1 billion shillings in specialized materials and supplies, including uniforms. 6.7 billion shillings in operating expenses, including contracted services provided to the government. 6.6 billion shillings in the wages for temporary employees. What temporary employees? The budget does not say. 5.3 billion shillings on traveling and accommodation domestically. 3.995 billion shillings on rentals. What does the government rent? Where does the government rent? The budget is silent. 3.4 billion shillings on an annual basis is for the acquisition of strategic stocks, and yet the government cannot feed the millions of starving Kenyans and is asking for international assistance. 3.3 billion shillings for fuel oil and lubricants every year. The government owns only 8,500 vehicles, 149 of which are in State House. 3.1 billion shillings for the purchase of vehicles and other transport equipment. 2.8 billion shillings for emergency relief and refugee assistance. The government has made an appeal for 3.5 billion shillings for relief food. Why? There is at least 2.8 billion shillings here and other expenditure items elsewhere in the budget. The government will spend 2.7 billion shillings for the purchase of general office supplies. The government will spend 2.6 billion shillings on paying electricity bills and water bills. 2.6 billion shillings on foreign travel, even though the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has 7.5 billion shillings to run foreign missions abroad. 2.5 billion shillings has been provided for in this budget for hospitality supplies and services. Some ministries have daily budgets for hospitality which exceed 700,000 shillings a day. A curious 2 billion shillings is reserved for something called budget reserves. The government this year will spend 1.8 billion shillings on the cost of motor vehicle maintenance, 1.7 billion shillings on the purchase of office furniture, 1.3 billion shillings has been given to the Ministry of Higher Education for domestic loans to individuals and households. Capital grants to government agencies and other levels of government comprise 1.1 billion shillings. 642 million shillings is planned for what is called refurbishment of buildings. Parliament will get 390 million shillings to refurbish buildings. State House will get 30 million shillings. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 38 million shillings. 25 ministries have been allocated 642 million shillings for refurbishment of buildings. Recalling that 3 billion shillings was allocated for the purchase of new vehicles for this year, a curious allocation is the 327 million shillings that is provided for the overhaul of vehicles and other transport equipment. The rehabilitation of civil works will consume 231,140,000 shillings. 206 million shillings is provided for something called personal allowances provided in kind. A total mystery. What is a payment provided in kind? 138 million shillings is spent every year by the government to purchase household furniture and equipment. Yes, the hungry taxpayers are paying for household furniture. 101 million shillings is devoted to capital grants and transfers, including Parliament, which will receive 99 million shillings this year for capital grant transfer. 100.6 million shillings is budgeted for construction of buildings, with Parliament getting 82 million shillings for a new parliamentary chamber and the disgraced Electoral Commission of Kenya getting 18.6 million shillings for some construction. 76.4 million shillings is allocated to construction and civil works. Parliament will get the largest share with 39 million shillings. The Ministry of Water will get 34.5 million shillings. Agriculture will get 1.7 million shillings, leaving two ministries, Livestock and Heritage, with 600,000 shillings and 500,000 shillings respectively. The government has allocated 50 million shillings for Parliament to purchase a building. This is quite apart from the 121 million shillings which Parliament has been allocated for the construction of a building and civil works. Bizarrely, the Controller and Auditor General has been allocated only 1,000 shillings for the purchase of buildings. 500,000 shillings has been budgeted for the acquisition of land by the government of Kenya for this year. What land will the government buy for 500,000 shillings? One of the largest single items in the budget are the provisions for the payment of the government of Kenya's debts. In the budget for this year, provisions have been made for the payment of fictitious external debts, including the Kenren Fertilizer Factory and Anglo Leasing, as direct charges on the consolidated fund to the tune of about 6.5 billion shillings. The total public debt, redemption or repayments put into the budget are 146 billion shillings. One of the budgetary items that rose from the previous budget are the provisions for pensions and gratuities. These account for almost 26 billion shillings, or twice the amount of money allocated to the development or construction of roads in Kenya. Contributing to the inflated pension bill of the government are runaway pensionable status, with many government servants and elected officials qualifying for pensions within their first years, and of course the phenomenon in Kenya where there are numerous public officials, elected and also in the civil service, who are actually on multiple pensions. 1 billion shillings is provided for something called miscellaneous, and any Kenyan is invited to hazard a guess as to what this means. The Minister of Finance and the Government of Kenya are required under the Constitution to obtain the approval of Parliament for the national budget and for the taxation proposals which accompany it in the finance bill. Parliament has the right and duty to question why certain expenditure is proposed and can ask the minister to amend his budgetary proposals. However, this year, Parliament did not debate the whole budget. Only 9 out of the 55 votes were actually discussed, and the budget was passed by a process called the guillotine. The guillotine process is used in few other countries in the world and has been abolished in the UK House of Commons, from which it originated. The guillotine process involves approving budgets without debate because of lack of time. So in other words, without debate, our representatives in Parliament have authorized the budget as presented by the Minister of Finance, and that budget contains waste, extravagance, and corrupt costs which cannot be justified. Our representatives in Parliament have allowed government to take 85% of the national budget for itself, leaving precious little or nothing for Kenyans, and especially the poorest
into the pipes
Kenyans.
countrywide to facilitate access to clean drinking water.
Our members of Parliament have let Kenyans down and have even tried to evade taxes by abusing their powers to pass laws, including the Finance Bill of 2008. Every individual member of the 10th Parliament was expected to have good working knowledge of public finance, its processes and procedures, and was expected to be able to know when the system was not working and what should be done to remedy the situation when the system was failing. This they have not lived up to. The government of Kenya, on its part, the Grand Coalition government, which is the executive branch, was meant to create the right atmosphere for work and economic production. If these two institutions were doing their work, then it would not be possible to say that in Kenya we had the problem of taxation without representation. In Kenya, what would have been that all tax revenue would be spent for the public good. But instead, it is quite clear that that is not what happened. Parliament passed this budget unscrutinized. They gave away our money to Anglo leasing crooks, to the Kenren fertilizer factory crooks, and allowed hundreds of billions of shillings of tax money to be allocated in wasteful expenditure. The American Revolution started when patriots there understood that there shall be no taxation without representation. It is now time to act. According to this year's budget, ordinary Kenyans contribute 71% of the money spent by government daily, mostly from VAT and consumption tax. 74% of taxes collected are used, however, to pay for big salaries, flashy cars, fuel allowances, and luxury trips for the politicians and a few top civil servants. More than 70% of civil servants are paid less than matatu drivers. The top 10% in civil service, political appointees, consume more than 50% of the salaries and allowances of government. This is very unfair. Only 26% of the taxes collected by government are used for roads, hospitals, schools. Most of the important things that are needed for the survival and alleviation of the suffering of ordinary Kenyans, including medicine, are paid for by donors who contribute 41% of the development budget of Kenya. Each year, the government of Kenya borrows money which ordinary citizens have to repay through their taxes. Unfortunately, these borrowed monies are used on corruption schemes and projects that rarely benefit Kenyans. Starving Kenyans are paying for the luxuries of a few politicians. This year's budget was passed by members of parliament with little discussion. It reflects a bad and wasteful government that has stopped caring for the people despite the many hardships they endure. The cost of living is so high that 80% of Kenyans cannot afford one meal a day. Most Kenyans are now casual workers, earning 100 shillings a day, yet maize flour alone costs over 100 shillings. The price of cooking oil, kerosene, electricity, and transport is 3 times what it was last year. Instead of helping ease the burden for Kenyans, the government will spend 7 billion shillings to buy and fuel limousines and big cars. Less than 1 billion shillings is planned to be used for relief food for starving Kenyans. The Cabinet Office, with only 237 employees, will get 4 billion shillings this year, but the Ministry for Cooperative Development, which serves millions of Kenyans, will only get 1 billion shillings. The Vice President's budget for travel is over 100 million shillings this year, while people are starving in Ukambani. More money will be spent on funding the household of the Prime Minister than is allocated for slum upgrading. The government has allocated 3.4 billion shillings for the import of maize so that prices come down. But the maize is being given to well-connected business people who sell it at high prices, meaning that Kenyan taxes are corruptly being used to make a few rich while the taxpayers continue to struggle. Right now there is a shortage of maize flour, but how can that be if the government has imported 3.4 billion shillings worth of maize? The politicians do not seem to care that 1.5 million Kenyans are starving. Thousands of poor people are dying of hunger. Millions are struggling to survive under great difficulty. To fundraise for their political campaigns, both Kibaki and Odinga collected billions of shillings from their friends. We remember when Kibaki's friends contributed over 1 million shillings, a plate, to his campaign. We remember Odinga's friends abroad were paying millions to dine with him. If either of them cared about the suffering children, they would raise funds for food. But even if they don't care, we can afford to feed the hungry from our taxes if the government stops wasting our taxes on buying and fueling big cars. Over 71% of the money the government is wasting comes from ordinary Kenyans through VAT and income tax. But not all Kenyans pay VAT. The government, for example, has specifically removed VAT for all goods and services used by the president. Is this fair? If Kenya's political class won't pay their taxes, no Kenyan should pay any taxes on food, medicine, fuel, or electricity. Join the Partnership for Change in demanding equal treatment for all Kenyans. On Jamhuri Day, December 12, 2008, we shall demand that tax relief is immediately given to the poor. It is necessary to reduce the price of food, electricity, and fuel to give relief to millions. We shall demand that all Kenyans are treated equally. Either all Kenyans, including judges and members of Parliament, are required to pay income taxes, or no Kenyan should pay income taxes. It is unfair to allow the rich and the powerful to evade tax while misusing the taxes of the poor. We shall demand that the government stops paying for corruption in our national budget, including the debts for Kenren Fertilizer Factory and Anglo-Leasing type projects, immediately. We shall demand that the government spends at least 60% of the national budget raised by Kenyan tax money on development that will benefit all Kenyans, instead of the current situation where 85% of our national budget is spent on the salaries, luxury, travel, allowances, flashy cars, and fuel for a few politicians. We shall insist that the government stops borrowing for luxury and corruption. We shall request the international community to assist us to clean our external debt register, to remove bogus debts, and we shall urge them to urgently call for a comprehensive debt relief for Kenyans. If the government does not listen to its people, we shall ask that all patriotic Kenyans join us in refusing to pay taxes to a cruel and wasteful government that does not care about us. We will withhold our taxes. We shall call for a tax boycott and are ready to face the consequences. Kenyans must not continue to give money to a government that does not spend the money wisely. What can you do? Withhold your income and other taxes until the changes you want are made. Avoid buying products from shops that have ETRs, and avoid buying items that have a barcode so that you can avoid paying VAT. Buy products from local kiosks that do not charge VAT. Attend the official Jamhuri Day celebrations and join other Kenyans in demanding tax relief. Wear a white ribbon to show support. Participate in prayers, demonstrations, processions, and other non-violent actions. Give this message to as many other Kenyans as possible. Communicate your discontent to politicians and join the Partnership for Change. Visit our websites for more information. Be part of real positive change in Kenya. Take control, take action, demand and get change.